The bullet that grazed Sarah Zimmerman's shoulder in the spring of 1882 wasn't what drove her from Texas to Wyoming, but the man who fired it certainly helped make up her mind. She arrived in Lusk with nothing but a worn carpetbag, $37, and a secret that sat heavy in her chest like a stone at the bottom of a well. The high plains stretched endlessly in every direction, and the wind carried the smell of sagebrush and distant rain as she stepped off the stagecoach onto the dusty Main Street. Lusk wasn't much to look at, just another cattle town trying to make something of itself along the railroad line. False-fronted buildings lined the wide dirt street, and cattle pens sprawled at the edge of town where cowboys drove herds up from Colorado and down from Montana. Sarah adjusted her bonnet against the afternoon sun and made her way toward the boarding house Mrs. Chen had mentioned at the last way station. She was 24 years old, and she felt ancient. The boarding house stood at the corner of Main and 2nd, a two-story structure painted white that had long since faded to gray. Mrs. Patterson, a robust woman with kind eyes and flour on her apron, showed Sarah to a small room on the 2nd floor. It wasn't much, but the bed looked clean and the window faced east, which meant morning light. "You looking for work, dear?" Mrs. Patterson asked, lingering in the doorway. "Yes, madam. Anything honest. The Lucky Star Saloon needs a cook. Owner's a decent man far as saloon owners go. Doesn't allow the rough stuff most places do. Food served in a separate dining room from the bar. Respectable enough for a lady if you don't mind the association." Sarah nodded. She'd come too far to be particular about associations. She started at the Lucky Star 3 days later, and that was where she first saw William Ashford. He came in with 2 other cowboys just after noon, all of them covered in trail dust and moving with that particular exhaustion that comes from weeks on the range. William was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He couldn't have been more than 26, maybe 27. He ordered the beef stew without looking at the menu board, and when Sarah brought it out, he thanked her with a tip of his head and a soft "much obliged," "madam," that carried a drawl from somewhere further south. His hands were scarred and calloused, working hands, and he ate like a man who'd forgotten what a good meal tasted like. She noticed him, but she didn't let herself think about it. That part of her life was finished. Over the next 2 weeks, William came in 4 more times, always polite, always with that same quiet courtesy that seemed rare among the rougher cowboys who passed through. The 5th time, he came in alone near closing, and Sarah was wiping down tables in the empty dining room. "Evening, madam," he said from the doorway. "I know it's late, but is there any chance of supper? I've got chicken and dumplings staying warm. Coffee's still hot, too. That sounds like heaven itself." She brought him a full plate and a cup of coffee, and instead of leaving him to eat in peace like she usually did, she found herself pausing by the kitchen door. "You're with the Rockingham outfit, aren't you?" He looked up, surprised she'd spoken beyond taking his order. "Yes, madam." "Been riding for Mr. Morrison since last fall. Name's William Ashford. Sarah Zimmerman. Pleased to know you proper, Miss Zimmerman." He hesitated, then added, "It's the finest cooking in 3 states, just so you know." She felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You're kind to say so." Not kindness, plain truth. Something in his tone made her meet his eyes, and she saw nothing but sincerity there. No ulterior motive, no calculation, just an honest man giving an honest compliment. It unsettled her more than flattery would have. After that, William came in twice a week, regular as clockwork. He'd take his meal and sometimes they'd exchange a few words, nothing improper, nothing that the other diners would notice. But Sarah noticed. She noticed the way his face lit up when he walked in and saw her behind the counter. She noticed how his gaze would follow her around the room. She noticed, and it terrified her. One evening in late June, a fight broke out in the saloon proper. Two drifters got into it over cards, and the violence spilled through the doors into the dining room. Sarah was carrying a tray of dishes when one of the men crashed into her, sending plates shattering across the floor. The man rounded on her, whiskey mean and looking for someone else to hurt. He never got the chance. William was there in an instant, putting himself between Sarah and the drunk. "Walk away," William said, his voice deadly quiet. "This ain't your concern, cowboy. I'm making it my concern. Walk away or be carried out." The drunk saw something in William's eyes that convinced him. He spat on the floor and staggered back toward the bar, where the owner was already hauling both fighters toward the door. William turned to Sarah, his expression shifting from hard to concerned in a heartbeat. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine. Just startled." Her hands were shaking as she knelt to gather the broken dishes. "Let me help." He crouched beside her, carefully picking up the larger pieces. Their fingers brushed as they both reached for the same shard, and the contact sent electricity up her arm. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Could have gotten yourself hurt. Couldn't stand by and watch." He looked at her directly, and his voice dropped lower. "Couldn't stand by and let anything happen to you." The weight of those words hung between them. Sarah stood abruptly, dumping the broken pieces onto the tray with a clatter. "I should get back to the kitchen." But William stood too, and he caught her wrist gently, not restraining, just enough to make her pause. "Miss Zimmerman, I wonder if I might speak with you. Somewhere proper, maybe Sunday after church, Mrs. Patterson could chaperone if that would make it respectable." "Mr. Ashford, I don't think that's wise." "Why not?" "Because I can't give you what you'll want," she thought. "Because I'm broken in ways you can't see. Because I'm not looking for company. Maybe not. But I'm hoping you might consider it anyway." His thumb brushed the inside of her wrist, feather light, and then he released her. "Think about it, please." She did think about it. For 3 days she thought of little else, until finally she agreed to a chaperoned walk Sunday afternoon. Mrs. Patterson accompanied them out to the creek that ran north of town, staying a respectful distance behind as William and Sarah walked the grassy bank. "I should tell you something before we go any further with this," Sarah said, watching the water flow over smooth stones. "Before you get ideas about what this might be." "All right." She took a breath, forcing the words out. "I was married before, 3 years ago in Waco. My husband was a good man, a farmer. We tried for children the way married people do, but nothing ever took." Her throat tightened. "After 2 years, he took me to a doctor in Houston. The doctor examined me and said there was something wrong inside, that I'd never bear children, that I was barren." William was quiet, listening. My husband never blamed me out loud, but I could see it in his eyes. The disappointment. His mother wanted grandchildren, and I couldn't give them to her. Eventually, he started spending more time in town, less time at home. Then one day he just didn't come back. She wrapped her arms around herself. Left me a note saying he was sorry, but he needed a real wife. Someone who could give him a family. I found out later he'd taken up with a widow 2 counties over. "Sarah, I'm not finished," she made herself continue. "I sold the farm, took what little I had, and started over. But then a man in Abilene started courting me. I told him the truth right from the start, told him I couldn't have children. He said he didn't care, that he wanted me anyway. We were engaged for 4 months. Her voice went flat. "Then I overheard him talking to his brother, laughing about it. Saying once we were married, he'd have the legal right to my property, and then it wouldn't matter if I was barren because he could take what I had and find a mistress to give him children on the side." William's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. "I broke it off. He didn't take it well." That bullet I came to town with. She touched her shoulder unconsciously. His parting gift barely grazed me, but it was enough to know I needed to leave Texas entirely. She finally looked at William. So that's who I am, a barren woman who's no good to any man alive. If you're looking for a wife to build a family with, you should stop wasting your time on me right now. The silence stretched out, broken only by the creek's burble and the distant call of a meadowlark. Then William spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "You finished," she nodded. "Good. Now let me tell you what I see." He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I see a woman who's been treated like property instead of a person. I see someone who's survived things that would have broken lesser people. I see the strongest woman I've ever met, and I see the woman I've been half in love with since the first time she brought me a bowl of stew and smiled at me like I was worth smiling at." "William, I'm not finished." He stepped closer. "I don't care if you can't have children. That's not why I want to know you. I want to know you because when you laugh at something funny, it's like sunshine breaking through clouds. I want to know you because you're kind to everyone who comes into that dining room, even the ones who don't deserve it. I want to know you because when I'm riding fence line in the middle of nowhere, I think about the way you tuck your hair behind your ear when you're concentrating on something." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "You're everything good to me, Sarah. Everything. And if you can't have children, well, that doesn't change a single thing about how I feel." Tears were streaming down her face before she could stop them. "You say that now, but later I'll still feel the same way. 5 years from now, 10 years, 20. I'll still think you're everything good." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and wiped her tears with his thumb. "I know you've got no reason to trust me. Those men before me proved themselves unworthy, but I'm asking for a chance to prove I'm different. I'm asking for the chance to court you proper. And maybe, if you come to feel for me even a fraction of what I feel for you, I'm asking for the chance to marry you someday. Not for children, not for property, but because I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life." Sarah couldn't speak. Her chest was so tight she could barely breathe. Finally, she managed, "Why? Why what? Why me? There are plenty of women in Wyoming who could give you everything." "I don't want everything, I want you." He said it simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Something in Sarah's chest cracked open, something she'd kept locked and guarded for so long. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "I'm afraid to believe you." "Then don't believe me yet, just give me time to show you." He held out his hand, palm up, offering, "Let me court you properly. Let me prove it." She looked at his hand, scarred and honest and steady. Then she placed her hand in his. The courtship that followed was the gentlest thing Sarah had ever experienced. William came to see her 3 times a week, always proper, always respectful. He brought her wildflowers from the range and buffalo horn buttons he'd carved himself during long nights in the bunkhouse. They took walks, always chaperoned, and talked about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Oklahoma Territory, the son of a cavalry scout and a schoolteacher. He told her about learning to rope and ride before he could properly raid, and about losing both his parents to influenza when he was 19. He'd been drifting ever since, working ranches across the West, never quite finding a place that felt like home. "Until Lusk," he said one evening as they sat on Mrs. Patterson's porch, watching the sun set behind the distant mountains. "Until you." Sarah told him things she'd never told anyone. About the shame she'd felt in Waco, sitting in church while the other wives whispered about her empty womb. About the way her mother-in-law had left Bible verses about barren women on her kitchen table, marked passages from the Old Testament about women whose worth was measured in children. About the crushing loneliness of being married to someone who looked through her instead of at her. I started believing them, she admitted. Started thinking maybe I really was worthless, that my only purpose was to bear children, and since I couldn't, what was I for? William's hand found hers in the twilight. You're for being Sarah. That's enough. That's everything. As summer deepened into August, Sarah felt herself falling despite her best efforts to protect her heart. It was in the small things. The way William always stood when she entered a room. The way he listened to her opinions about politics and philosophy and actually considered them, not just humored her. The way he looked at her like she was precious. One Saturday, the annual town social was held in the church hall. William asked if he could escort her, and Sarah agreed. She wore her best dress, a green calico she'd made herself, and William showed up in a pressed shirt with his hair still damp from washing. They danced 3 waltzes, proper distance between them, but Sarah felt the warmth of his hand at her waist like a brand. When the fiddle player started a slower song, William pulled her just slightly closer. Everyone's watching us, Sarah murmured. Let them watch. I'm the luckiest man in the territory, dancing with the prettiest woman in Wyoming. You're biased, absolutely. He grinned at her and her heart tumbled over itself. I'm also right. During the refreshment break, Sarah overheard 2 women talking near the punch bowl. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their voices carried. That's the new cook from the Lucky Star. I heard she was married before. Divorced? Worse, husband left her. You know what that usually means. Barren, probably. Poor William Ashford. Someone should tell him before he gets too attached. He's a good man. Deserves a proper wife who can give him children. Sarah's hand trembled, sloshing punch over the rim of her cup. She set it down carefully and walked out the side door into the night air, fighting the tightness in her throat. William found her 5 minutes later standing in the shadows beside the church. Sarah, what's wrong? You should go back inside. Not until you tell me what happened. He moved closer, his face concerned. Did someone say something to you? It doesn't matter. It matters to me. She turned on him, sudden anger flaring. They're right, you know. You do deserve a proper wife. You deserve someone who can give you sons and daughters. You deserve more than a broken woman who can't fulfill the most basic purpose a wife is supposed to have. Stop. William's voice was sharp, sharper than she'd ever heard it. Stop saying that. Stop believing it. Why, it's true. It's not true. He gripped her shoulders, gentle but firm, making her look at him. You are not broken. You are not worthless. And the only purpose a wife is supposed to have is to be a partner to her husband. Everything else is just details. Children aren't details. To me, they are. Sarah, listen to me. His eyes were fierce in the lamplight spilling from the hall windows. If God blesses us with children someday, whether we adopt them or they come to us some other way, then that's wonderful. But if He doesn't, that's all right too, because having you in my life is enough. You are enough. How can you be sure? How can you know you won't wake up one day and resent me? Because I know myself. Because I've spent 27 years on this earth figuring out what matters to me, and what matters is finding someone who makes me want to be better than I am. Someone who makes coming home feel like a privilege instead of an obligation. Someone whose happiness matters more to me than my own. He released her shoulders but caught her hands instead. That's you, Sarah. That's only you. She was crying again, but this time the tears felt different. Cleansing instead of bitter. I want to believe you, I want to so badly. Then believe me. He brought her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles with devastating tenderness. Believe me and marry me. Her breath stopped. What, marry me? I know it's only been 2 months, I know it's fast. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. He held her gaze. I love you, Sarah Zimmerman. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you hum when you cook. I love how you always save the burnt edges of the cornbread for yourself so everyone else gets the good pieces. I love that you're stubborn and smart and you don't take nonsense from anyone. I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you every single day. William. Her voice broke on his name. You don't have to answer now, think about it, but know that I mean every word. You're everything good to me, Sarah. Everything that matters. She looked at him standing there in the August darkness, this good man offering her everything she'd stopped believing she could have. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the scars and the fear and the shame, something whispered that maybe, just maybe, she could be brave enough to try again. Yes, she whispered. He went very still. Yes, yes, I'll marry you, louder this time, more certain. Yes. The joy that broke across his face was like sunrise. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her clean off the ground and spinning her once before setting her down and cupping her face in his hands. I'm going to make you so happy, I swear it. You already do. He kissed her then, soft and reverent like she was something holy. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. I love you. I love you too. It was the first time she'd said it out loud, and the words felt like freedom. They were married 3 weeks later in the same church where they danced. Sarah wore a cream-colored dress with lace at the collar, and William wore a new suit he'd bought special from the general store. Mrs. Patterson cried through the whole ceremony, and half the town showed up to wish them well. Mr. Morrison, William's boss at the Rocking M, gave them a week off for a honeymoon. They couldn't afford to go far, so they took a room at the hotel in Cheyenne and spent 7 days learning each other in ways both tender and passionate. On their wedding night, Sarah was nervous, old fears creeping back. But William was patient and gentle, and when he made love to her, it was with a reverence that made her feel cherished rather than used. Afterward, she lay in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady thrum of his heartbeat. No regrets, she asked softly. Not a single one. He kissed the top of her head. You? No, for the first time in years, no regrets at all. They returned to Lusk and moved into a small house on the edge of town that William had been renting. It wasn't much, just 3 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, but Sarah made it a home with curtains sewn from flour sacks and wildflowers on the table. She kept cooking at the Lucky Star, and William rode out with the Rocking M crew 6 days a week. The first few months of marriage were an adjustment. William snored, and Sarah was particular about how the dishes were washed. He liked his coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and she thought that was wasteful. But they worked through each small friction with humor and patience, and the life they built together felt solid. Winter came hard to the high plains that year. By November, snow lay 3 feet deep, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze in the basin overnight. William was gone more often, riding the range to check on cattle and break ice on stock tanks. Sarah worried every time he left, afraid the cold would take him from her. One night in early December, he came home half frozen, his hands so numb he could barely work the door latch. Sarah pulled him inside and stripped off his icy coat, wrapping him in blankets and pressing hot coffee into his hands. "You're going to catch your death out there," she scolded, rubbing warmth back into his arms. "Had to get the cattle into the lower pasture. Storm's coming that'll be worse than this. I don't care about the cattle, I care about you." He caught her hand, bringing it to his cold cheek. "I'm all right. Takes more than a little snow to do me in." But that night, lying in bed with the wind howling outside, William pulled her close and said quietly, "If something did happen to me out there, I want you to know you made my life worth living. These months with you have been the happiest I've ever known. Don't talk like that. Nothing's going to happen to you, I know, but just in case I wanted to say it." She kissed him fiercely. "You're not allowed to die on me, William Ashford, I forbid it," he laughed, the sound rumbling in his chest. "Yes, madam." The storm hit 2 days later, a blizzard that lasted 3 days and nights. William was trapped at the ranch with the rest of the crew, and Sarah spent those days sick with worry, barely eating, watching the snow pile higher and higher against the windows. When the storm finally broke and he came home, snow-covered and exhausted, she flew into his arms and held him so tight he protested laughingly that she'd crack his ribs. "I was so scared," she admitted into his shoulder. "I'm here. I'm all right. Takes more than weather to keep me from you." Christmas came, their first together. They couldn't afford much, but Sarah knitted him a scarf in dark blue wool, and he'd saved up to buy her a brooch shaped like a rose. They spent the day in bed, warm under quilts, talking and laughing and making love while snow fell softly outside. "This is all I ever wanted," Sarah said, tracing patterns on his bare chest. "Just this, just you. You have me. For as long as we both live, you have me." The winter passed slowly, and spring came late to Wyoming in 1883. When the snow finally melted and the prairie greened up, William got a promotion to foreman at the Rocking M. It came with better pay and a house on the ranch property, a real house with 4 rooms and a covered porch. "What do you think?" William asked, showing Sarah around the empty rooms. "Would you mind living out here? It's further from town, but the house is bigger. We could finally have space for a proper parlor. I think it's perfect." She turned to him, grinning. "And I already gave my notice at the Lucky Star. Figured if my husband's going to be foreman, I should probably be around more to make sure he's eating properly." They moved in early May, and Sarah threw herself into making the house their own. She planted a garden behind the house, rows of beans and squash and tomatoes. She made new curtains and braided rag rugs for the floors. William built her a chicken coop, and they started a small flock of hens. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. William was busy with the ranch, but he came home every night to Sarah's cooking and Sarah's arms. They'd sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the endless grass, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest. One evening in late June, they were sitting like that when William said, "I've been thinking. Dangerous pastime," he smiled. "Maybe we should think about adding to our family." Sarah went still. "William, I don't mean have children, I know that's not possible, but there's an orphanage in Cheyenne, kids who need homes. I thought maybe we could inquire about adopting if you wanted to." He looked at her carefully. "No pressure, I just thought I'd mention it." Sarah's throat was tight. "You'd really want that, to raise someone else's child. They wouldn't be someone else's child, they'd be ours." He took her hand. "But only if you want to. I meant what I said, Sarah. You're enough for me. But if you want children in our lives, there are children who need parents. Seems like it could be good for everyone." She thought about it for 3 days, turning the idea over in her mind. Finally, she told William yes, she'd like to at least inquire. They took the train to Cheyenne in July and spent an afternoon at the orphanage, a grim brick building run by stern-faced matrons. The children there ranged from infants to teenagers, all with that particular hollow look of kids who'd learned not to hope too hard. The director, a Mrs. Walsh, explained the adoption process and then offered to let them meet some of the children. "You have a preference? Age, gender?" "No preference," William said. "Just someone who needs a home." Mrs. Walsh led them to a common room where several children were sitting quietly. Most of them looked up briefly, then away, accustomed to disappointment. But one little boy, maybe 5 years old, stared at them with intense curiosity. He had dark hair and dark eyes and was small for his age. "That's Thomas," Mrs. Walsh said. "He came to us a year ago. Parents died of cholera. He's a quiet child, very well behaved." Sarah knelt down to the boy's level. "Hello, Thomas. I'm Sarah." The boy looked at her solemnly but didn't speak. "He doesn't talk much," Mrs. Walsh said. Hasn't said more than a few words since he arrived. William crouched beside Sarah. That's all right. We're not much for chatter either, are we, Sarah? Sarah shook her head, not taking her eyes off Thomas. There was something in his eyes, some deep sadness that resonated with her own old wounds. Would you like to come home with us, Thomas? We have a house on a ranch with chickens and horses. There's lots of space to run around. Thomas looked between them, and then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. The adoption process took 2 months of paperwork and inspections and questions. But in September of 1883, Thomas Ashford came home to the Rocking M. He was shy and skittish at first, jumping at loud noises and hoarding food under his bed like he was afraid it wouldn't be there tomorrow. But slowly, with patience and consistency, he began to relax. William taught him to ride on a gentle mare named Betsy. Sarah let him help in the garden, showing him how to tell when the tomatoes were ripe. At night, she'd tuck him into the small bed they'd set up in the spare room and tell him stories until he fell asleep. The first time Thomas laughed, a bright peal of sound when William pretended to be chased by a chicken, Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. The first time he called her Mama, she had to leave the room to compose herself, so overwhelmed with joy she could barely breathe. See, William said that night, holding her as she cried happy tears into his shoulder. We're a family. Not the way you thought it would be, maybe, but a family all the same. I never imagined I could be this happy. After everything, I never thought. I know, me neither. He kissed her temple. Funny how life works out. Thomas thrived with them. Within 6 months, he'd grown 2 inches and filled out, no longer the hollow-eyed waif from the orphanage. He chattered constantly now, making up for lost time, telling them long, rambling stories about the chickens and the horses and everything he saw. In the spring of 1884, Sarah and William decided to adopt again. This time they brought home a little girl named Lucy, 3 years old, who'd been left on the orphanage steps as an infant. She was all curls and giggles, the opposite of Thomas's initial solemnity, and she fit into their family like she'd always been there. The house rang with children's laughter now. Thomas taught Lucy to collect eggs from the hens. William built them a rope swing in the cottonwood tree by the creek. Sarah sewed them clothes and baked them cookies, and told them stories about brave children who had adventures on the prairie. One night, tucking Thomas into bed, he looked up at her with serious eyes. "Mama, are you going to send us back?" Sarah's heart clenched. "What? No, sweetheart. Never. Why would you think that?" Jimmy at the orphanage said sometimes people give kids back if they're too much trouble. She sat on the edge of his bed and pulled him into her arms. "You listen to me, Thomas Ashford. You and Lucy are our children, forever. Nothing you could do would ever make us send you back. Do you understand? Promise, I promise, cross my heart and hope to die." He relaxed against her. "I'm glad. I like it here. I like having a mama and a papa. We like having you too. So much." The years passed in a blur of ordinary miracles. Thomas started school in town, riding in with William 3 days a week. Lucy grew out of her baby fat and into a wild tomboy who could ride as well as any of the ranch hands. They adopted a 3rd child in 1886, a boy named Samuel who was 7 and had a gift for working with horses. The house was chaos now, full of noise and mess and love. Sarah, who'd once thought she'd never be a mother, found herself with 3 children who called her Mama and climbed into her lap for comfort when they were hurt or scared. William, who'd once been a drifting cowboy, was now a father who taught his sons to rope and his daughter to spot animal tracks and all of them to be kind. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Sarah and William left the children with Mr. Morrison's wife and took a weekend trip to Cheyenne, staying in the same hotel where they'd spent their honeymoon. Lying in bed on Saturday morning, sunshine streaming through the window, Sarah propped herself up on one elbow and looked at her husband. "What are you thinking?" William asked, running his fingers through her hair. "I'm thinking about how wrong I was. Back when I told you I was no good to any man alive. You were never wrong about your worth, just wrong about how other people measured it. Those men made me believe I was only valuable if I could bear children, but you showed me that wasn't true. You loved me when I had nothing to offer but myself. You thought I was enough when I was just Sarah, nothing more. You were always more than enough." He pulled her down for a kiss. "You were everything. We built something beautiful anyway, didn't we? Even though we couldn't have children the traditional way, we have a family. We have 3 amazing kids who needed us as much as we needed them. We did. And I wouldn't change a single thing about our life, Sarah, not one thing." She settled back into his arms, perfectly content. "Neither would I." They returned home to chaos. Lucy had fallen out of a tree and scraped her knee. Thomas had gotten into a fight at school defending Samuel from bullies, and Samuel had taught himself to play the harmonica badly and wouldn't stop. But it was their chaos, their beautiful messy life, and Sarah wouldn't have traded it for anything. More years passed. The children grew. Thomas became a serious boy who loved books and wanted to be a lawyer someday. Lucy remained wild and free, determined to be a rancher like her father. Samuel had a gift with horses that was almost uncanny and could gentle the most skittish bronc. In 1889, William and Sarah adopted one more child, a teenage girl named Rose who was 15 and had aged out of most families' preference. She was sullen and angry at first, convinced this was temporary like everything else in her life. But Sarah was patient, and William was steady, and eventually Rose began to believe she was really home. Rose helped Sarah with the cooking and the younger children. She was good with her hands, talented at sewing and mending. As she softened, they learned she could sing like an angel, and on Sunday evenings the family would gather in the parlor while Rose sang hymns and folk songs. By 1890, Thomas was 14 and talking about going to law school back east someday. Lucy was 12 and could outride most of the ranch hands. Samuel was 11 and had started breaking horses for the Rocking M. Rose was 17 and being courted by a nice young man from town. Sarah was 32 years old, and when she looked at her life, she was astounded by how much it had changed. She'd gone from a woman who believed she was worthless to a woman with a husband who adored her, and 4 children who needed her, and a home full of love and laughter. One evening in late summer, she and William sat on the porch after the children had gone to bed. The prairie stretched out before them under a sky full of stars, and the air was soft with the smell of grass and sage. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Sarah asked, laced into his side. "If I hadn't come to Lusk, if you hadn't walked into that dining room, sometimes, then I stop because it makes me too grateful I don't have to live that other life." He kissed the top of her head. "This is what I was meant for. You are what I was meant for. I used to think being barren was the worst thing that could happen to me. I thought it meant I'd failed at being a woman, failed at the one thing I was supposed to be able to do." She looked up at him. "But maybe it was just life's way of pointing me in a different direction. Maybe I wasn't meant to bear children because I was meant to mother the ones who needed me most, the ones who'd been abandoned or orphaned or forgotten. Maybe. Or maybe things just happened the way they happened and we made the best of it. Either way, we built something good. We built something beautiful." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Inside the house, their children slept safe and warm. Around them, the land stretched endlessly, full of possibility and promise. "I never thanked you properly," Sarah said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me. For loving me when I couldn't love myself. for making me believe I was enough." William turned her face up to his eyes serious in the starlight. "You were always enough, Sarah. I didn't make you believe it. I just kept saying it until you could finally hear it." "I hear it now. Every day I hear it. Good." He kissed her slow and sweet. "Because I'll keep saying it for the rest of our lives. You're everything good to me, everything that matters, and I'm the luckiest man who ever lived because you chose to believe me." The years continued to unfold in their gentle rhythm. Rose married her young man in 1891 and moved to town, but she visited every Sunday with her new husband. Thomas left for law school in Chicago in 1893, breaking Sarah's heart even as she was proud of him. Lucy declared she was never leaving the ranch and started learning the business side of ranching from her father. Samuel was hired on as the Rocking MTK's head horse trainer at just 16. In 1895, Rose had a baby, a little girl she named Sarah after her mother. When she placed the infant in Sarah's arms, she said, "I want her to grow up knowing her grandmother, the woman who saved me when I thought I couldn't be saved." Sarah looked down at the baby, this new generation, and felt the circle complete itself. She'd been told she was barren and worthless, but here she was, a grandmother holding her daughter's child, surrounded by a family built on love rather than blood. "What are you thinking?" William asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around both her and the baby. "I'm thinking about that day by the creek, when I told you I was barren and no good to any man alive. I remember. And I remember telling you that you were everything good to me. You were right." She leaned back against him, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. "You were right about everything. So were you. You're still everything good to me, Sarah Ashford, everything good in my whole world." They stood there together, husband and wife, surrounded by the family they'd built from broken pieces and second chances. Outside, the Wyoming wind sang through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and home. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed their evening song. Thomas would come home from law school for Christmas. Lucy would take over the ranch someday, running it with the same steady competence her father had shown. Samuel would marry and raise his children on the land he loved. Rose would have 3 more babies, filling the world with love. And through it all, Sarah and William would be there, the foundation on which everything else was built. In 1900, on their 17th wedding anniversary, William took Sarah back to the creek where he'd proposed. They were older now, both touching 40 with gray threading through their hair and lines around their eyes. But when he looked at her, she still saw the same love that had been there in 1883. "I have something to tell you," William said, taking her hands. "What's that?" "I've been offered a partnership in the Rockingham. Mr. Morrison wants to retire and he's offered to sell me half the ranch. I'd be part owner." Sarah's eyes went wide. "William, that's incredible, but can we afford it? I've been saving for years. And Morrison's giving me favorable terms because he trusts me, says I've earned it." He squeezed her hands. "But I wanted to ask you first. It would mean we're tied to this place permanently. No more chances to move somewhere else, try something new. This would be our life, right here on this land." "This is already our life. This land, these people, this place. It's already home." She smiled at him. "Of course we should do it. I can't think of anything better than building our future right here." So William became part owner of the Rockingham, and the ranch flourished under his management. Lucy worked alongside him, learning everything she'd need to know to run it herself someday. The family grew as the children married and had babies of their own. The house that had once been so quiet now rang with grandchildren's laughter during holidays and Sunday dinners. In 1905, on a warm June evening, Sarah stood in her kitchen preparing supper for what felt like an army. Thomas was visiting from Chicago with his wife and 2 children. Rose and her husband had brought their 4 kids. Samuel lived just down the road with his wife and new baby. Lucy was still at home, though she was courting a neighboring rancher's son. The house was full to bursting with family and noise and love. William came in from the barn and wrapped his arms around her from behind, nuzzling her neck. "Need help? I need about 6 more hands and a bigger oven." But she was smiling as she said it. "Remember when it was just us in that little house in town, so quiet you could hear the clock ticking? I remember thinking I'd be alone forever, that no one would ever want a barren woman with too much pride and too many scars. Shows what you knew." He turned her to face him. "You were never alone. You were just waiting for the right person to see you, and you were that person. I was the lucky person who got there first." He kissed her softly. "I love you, Sarah Ashford, just as much now as the day I married you. More even, because now I have 22 years of memories to love you for. Only 22 years. We've got at least 22 more ahead of us. At least. Maybe 50. He grinned at her. "I plan to love you until I'm old and gray and can't remember my own name. And even then, I'll remember you. I'll remember that you're everything good." From the parlor came the sound of children laughing, grandchildren playing, family gathering. The sun slanted through the kitchen window, gilding everything in gold. The prairie wind sang outside, carrying all the old songs. Sarah looked at her husband, this man who'd loved her when she couldn't love herself, who'd built a life with her from nothing but faith and hope and stubborn determination. She thought about that broken woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach in Lusk all those years ago, convinced she had nothing left to offer the world, how wrong she'd been. How beautifully, wonderfully wrong. "I love you too," she whispered, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for showing me I was worth loving. Always. Forever. Until the stars fall down and the prairie turns to ocean. You're everything good to me, Sarah. Everything that ever mattered." And in that moment, standing in her kitchen with her husband's arms around her and her family's laughter filling the house and the Wyoming sunset painting the world in shades of promise, Sarah knew it was true. She was good. She was enough. She was loved. She was home.